The Kansas City Chiefs have once again triumphed in the divisional round of the playoffs. Patrick Mahomes is going to his 7th straight AFC Championship game. The Texans are in shambles. There is plenty to unpack with this game. We will talk about the officiating side in the second half of this video, but we're going to start with the actual game as not to get bogged down with an argument 3 seconds in. We like saving our arguments till about a minute and a half, 2 minutes in. And when you see the Texans, you think about why they lost. It's pretty clear it's because they're lackluster special teams. The worst special teams performance of the year was put on display by the Texans this week and their crappy offensive line. Laramie Tunsil is a shadow of himself, but is still their best line. They've had injuries, but the players they've got, the draft picks they've used, they've just not manifested for Houston. 8 sacks, could have been more. 3 came from Karlaftis, a lot came from outside linebackers, defensive ends, and 1 came from a cornerback. Only 1 came from an interior guy, defensive tackle, and it wasn't even Chris Jones. I was kind of surprised by that given how much the pocket was caving in, but I guess they were funneling Stroud back into the defensive ends. Clearly an area of strength for the Kansas City Chiefs, an area of weakness for the Texans, and it really ramped up once we got to the 4th quarter and the reins were cut off and Kansas City just started blitzing every single play, it felt like. Better schematical team, better in the trenches, and that is why they won the game in addition to the special team stuff.
People keep pointing out just how many yards the Texans had compared to the Chiefs. It's a shock that the Texans were not able to pull off the victory, but a lot of those were empty calories. In the biggest high leverage situations, the Texans were not successful. They missed an extra point that would have tied the game at that point in the game. They missed a field goal that would have put them within distance of being able to come back and beat the Chiefs, and they gave up 8 sacks. When your offensive line is a constant turnstile, getting your quarterback sacked, killing drives, you are not going to beat this Chiefs team that in the biggest moments execute. I mean, you have the moment in the game, which we'll talk about the penalties in a bit, where Patrick Mahomes tries to flop, but then right back after that, you have an opportunity to maybe force the Chiefs to kick a field goal, and Patrick Mahomes diving, falling, throws a touchdown to Travis Kelce. So in the biggest moments, when the Texans maybe had an opportunity to force the Chiefs into mistakes or execute on their own side of the ball, they just did not get it done, whereas the Chiefs did. That is the reason the Texans lost this game.
Yeah, they're pointing to the no turnover stat and saying, oh, the Texans outside special teams played a relatively flawless game. They made a ton of mistakes, failing to pick up 3rd downs, which they really should, not hitting open receivers. I don't think Stroud played poorly, all things considered, given what he was facing from a pressure standpoint, but he definitely let his team down at points. He wasn't why they lost, but he could have played better. Looking at the Chiefs side of this now, playoff Travis Kelce, yada, yada, yada. At the end of the day, any team which runs zone defense is going to get absolutely dissected by Mahomes and Kelce in the playoffs. The Texans were using all their resources on the outside to try and limit the Chiefs wide receivers. Xavier Worthy was the only Chiefs wide receiver to record multiple catches. I think he was the only Chiefs wide receiver to record a catch in this game. Diop phased out, Hollywood Brown phased out. Everyone else on that roster, besides Travis Kelce, was a non-factor in the passing game. But because Kelce can find those spots, is decent after the catch, despite being an old man who can barely run anymore, he still kept picking up those yards, kept picking up those tough 3rd down conversions. And I am struggling to imagine any team who cannot man him up at this point, keeping him under 80, 90, maybe even 100 yards in the playoff game.
We've seen him have slower regular seasons each of the last 2 years where he was still very productive, but not the typical Travis Kelce we've seen over the course of his Hall of Fame career. And it's starting to get to a point over the last 2 playoffs at least where he has been so dominant that next season, I feel like he's just going to retire for the regular season, then come out of retirement in the playoffs and dominate again come playoff time. It almost doesn't even make sense how lackluster he's been during the regular season compared to the rest of his career just to turn it on in the playoffs.
The amusing part of that is I don't think you're entirely right, because this year was arguably the best blocking season of Travis Kelce's career. So he is down there for some reason in year 12 or whatever it is, putting his helmet in the defensive tackle's ribs and shipping guys out. As a passing factor, yeah, the athleticism isn't there, but the effort is pretty clearly still there. He's putting himself through more contact even as a blocker this year, and it manifesting in the playoffs. Maybe that's because they didn't really use him much as a blocker this game. They didn't run all that much up the middle, which is the area of weakness I would say for the Texans. Obviously, their secondary is fantastic. You're not doing much outside, but the Chiefs, I'm trying to find some way to describe how lackluster the Chiefs' offense is while still giving them their credit. The run game was terrible outside of a few Kareem Hunt carries.
It's not like the Texans were slouches on defense. I mean, there's a reason they were so dominant against the Chargers in the wild card round. They have a great defense with two very good pass rushers, and they have a pretty good secondary. So the fact that the Chiefs weren't totally dominant on offense, it is not a shock considering just how good this defense has been against some teams this year.
We'll use this as a transition here. They got 3 points from a pretty ticky-tack roughing the passer call, and then got another 3 points from starting, inside the own 30, thanks to an opening kickoff plus 15-yard penalty thing. They essentially got 6 points spotted them. Outside of those 6 points, they couldn't crack 20 against this Texans team, despite, I believe, dominating time possession. At the very least, they should have had more time in possession than they did, but they just could not sustain drives. A pretty pathetic showing from a great offense, and a pretty pathetic showing from the Texans offense. The silver lining for the Texans, I'll end with this. They have a clear path going forward. They have got to dump draft picks, dump money into the offensive line. The defense is there. Danielle Hunter's under contract. Will Anderson, Stingley on rookie deals still. You need to spend every resource available to you on offensive line. Maybe you go get another receiver because you don't think Tank Dell can hold up. You don't feel like paying Diggs the big bucks. That could be an option to you, but they know what they need to do now.
I would agree.
All right, let's talk about the officiating. And I've sat in this very chair, this sweat-stained chair, this greasy chair, countless times said, yeah, the Chiefs, unfair advantage with the officials. The other team got hosed. This game, I think it's pretty safe to say the outcome was not drastically affected by these penalties. I look back to the phantom fifth down against the Bengals in 2023, to the holding penalty in the Super Bowl, which robbed the Eagles of a chance to have a game-winning drive against the Chiefs.
It was a holding penalty.
I say, okay, those penalties were not evenly officiated all game. They're questionable calls, and they impacted the outcome. They took something away from us, whether that be a Joe Burrow or a Jalen Hurts drive. Whatever. We lost something because of that. We did not lose anything because of the 2 really terrible missed penalties against the Chiefs today. Were they bad calls? Yes. That Will Anderson roughing the passer one clearly begins the contact with his head, his face mask in Mahomes' chest kind of slides up. That's not roughing the passer. That's never roughing the passer. And then the unnecessary roughness on Mahomes falling flat on his back and the 2 Texans defenders hitting each other in the head. No one's going to try and justify those as the correct call. In other games, in higher leverage situations, against an opponent who did not have a complete special teams and offensive line meltdown, I might be more upset about this. This was a 3-point game. I'd be more annoyed about those penalties, which gave the Chiefs points. At the very least, gave them 3. Probably gave them 10 if you view the 15-yarder, which wasn't called as an extended to the drive with how apathetic the Chiefs offense is and what led to a touchdown. So if it was a more competitive game, if it was closer, I'd be more upset about this. Obviously, those are both the wrong call. I'll touch on the replay review stuff after you've said your piece, but I can't find it in my heart to care this much.
I don't think anyone's going to disagree on there being poor calls that took place in this game that happened to benefit the Chiefs. The thing that just always bothers me when it comes to referees and when it comes to the Chiefs is people act like they're the only team in the NFL that have calls go their way. Because in the game immediately after there were some rough calls that were missed or calls that shouldn't have happened in the Commanders versus Lions game. It happens every single week in every single game. The only reason people always get so worked up about the Chiefs and the penalties that are called in their favor is because they've won back-to-back Super Bowls. They've been so dominant. They're constantly in primetime games. And in the playoffs, in a game that was relatively close, they had 2 calls go their way. We overall gave our opinion on the fact that the Texans really beat themselves more than the refs hurt them this game. But just to speak to the penalty that shouldn't have been a penalty, where the Texans defenders crashed into each other, they would have had it at 2nd and 5 if that penalty was not called. They still would have had a very good opportunity to go get a first down and drive down the field. That was not a debilitating and crippling no-call penalty if that penalty wasn't called.
I disagree with that. We both have talked about how apathetic and sluggish the Chiefs offense was outside of Kelsey. Spotting that team 15 yards, that's a pretty big deal in that game. When you are struggling to get any sort of production from your offense, a 15-yard penalty which gives you an automatic first down is a massive deal.
I'm not saying it's not something that helped that drive be more successful But to act like they were 3rd and 12 and the penalty caused it to be a first down when it would have just been 2nd and 5, I think is a little silly from the fans that are completely ignoring that fact.
I mean, I don't think they're even acting like that. I think they're saying it's an egregious penalty where Mahomes doesn't even get hit with 2 helmets, and somehow it is a penalty on him. It was a terrible call. The people are more upset about the call than the down distance of that specific play. They're upset about the drive being extended with the Will Anderson roughing the passer call, but I digress. And you're wrong about it. Oh, people just care because the Chiefs are a successful team. Them being in prime time and being in the playoffs means they have more eyes on them, so naturally it's going to get a bigger reaction. But there's a disproportionate amount of these calls which go for the Chiefs in these high leverage situations. Calls where it has not been evenly officiated all game, but suddenly a flag pops up, which, well, maybe this is the letter of the law, but it's not been the letter of the law the way it's been officiated the previous 55 minutes of the game, but suddenly it is. There has to be either some consistency or the refs have to have some help from upstairs at this point, which leads me into the replay review stuff. I think we will see a rule put in place this offseason. We'll talk about a little bit of the Lions game too, so we don't talk about the penalties and that. There was a pretty clear non-face mask, which was called a face mask, which resulted in a Lions touchdown, the Commanders game. Replay review would have had that flag picked up. The 2 roughing the passer calls probably would have been picked up. At the very least, the helmet-to-helmet Texans one would have been picked up if there was an eye-in-the-sky replay availability to pick up those flags. We are going to see that voted on, probably put into place this offseason, in large part because we have seen 2 primetime games affected by really bad flags, which anyone who can watch it on slow-mo in the replay theater can say, yeah, not a good call.
Well, we've seen what happens around the league when something controversial goes in the Chiefs' favor. I mean, they changed overtime rules because of how the Chiefs' overtime ended a couple of years ago. So
what's that comment supposed to mean? Did you like the old overtime rules?
When things benefit the Chiefs in the playoffs, we see owners vote on something that changes the rules completely. So I'm sure that'll happen.
Okay, so instead of going from, yeah, we're going to get the correct call, you're now spinning this as, oh, it benefits the Chiefs, the officials throwing flags more generally, making the incorrect calls. That's the angle you're taking?
I'm just saying we're probably going to, I agree with you.
I think
I don't get why you're so upset that I'm agreeing with you.
You're not agreeing with me. You're giving this back at, oh, you've got to stop the Chiefs, so we got to change the rules. Yeah, crappy flags.
That's not what I'm saying.
That is exactly what you said. That is exactly what you said.
I did not say it that way at all.
Yeah, oh, well, the overtime rules help the Chiefs, so we got to change that. Oh, these penalties, which shouldn't have been penalties, help the Chiefs, so we got to change that. What are you trying to do here, man?
What are you trying to do? You're trying to rephrase?
Are you trying to say the Chiefs are disproportionately affected by crappy rules and ineffective officiating? Is that what you're saying? Because I agree with you on that.
Now you're just completely contorting and distorting what I said.
I think I'm just repeating what you said, man. Either way, a bootlicker extraordinaire over there, a broken soul who had to watch his team get shellacked by the Rams over here. Those were our thoughts on the Chiefs-Texans game. Look forward to our reactions to all the remaining divisional games and our predictions for the conference championship games in the coming days.
Like the video, subscribe, use code Thicc on Underdog, and we'll see you in the next one.